let's start with, how did you get into religion? Around what age, what denomination?
My dad was a career Navy guy, and they weren't religious. We never went to church. So I was a Navy brat, and we moved from town to town. Every year and a half, I'd have to go to a new town, get into a new school. Never went to church. But when my dad retired, they settled in Spokane, which was my mother's hometown, and it
Washington?
was, yeah, Spokane, Washington, and it was there that a local country preacher got his claws on my parents and got them to accept Jesus as their personal savior. And until then, we'd never gone to church much at all, maybe once a year. And they were on the verge of getting divorced anyway and arguing all the time. And they were kind of partiers and they drank too. And I was about 12 or 13 when this happened, and it was like they had transformed. Once they became Christians, they stopped arguing and they stayed married for the rest of their life. They stopped drinking, or at least I'm pretty sure they stopped drinking.
Mhm.
In the attic after my dad passed away, I did find some of those little sample whiskey
Oh,
bottles.
yeah.
Anyway, no, it transformed our family, and so when you're 13, it really makes an impact. And by the time I was 14, I also accepted Jesus as my savior. And uh, and then of course I was always the in the schools I went to, I was an outsider and not really part of any groups, and I wasn't athletic. But once I got into high school, I really got accepted by the church group, the young people in the
Yeah.
church, and it was my people.
Yeah. Oh my
um,
gosh,
I
that's totally me too.
Yeah,
That's
and I was
crazy.
like, I was right at home there. People didn't judge me for how skinny I was, or how athletic I was, or how good looking I was,
Mhm.
but they just accepted me, and I kind of started leading, you know, groups. And back in those days, I graduated in '66. It was not popular to be a Christian. Nobody admitted to it. And it's funny because it's 180 degrees now. I'm an atheist, but all of my old school friends that I graduated high school with, they've all become Christians. Whereas back in 1965 and '66, none of them were Christians. So
So you didn't
yeah,
fit in with them then, you're not fitting in with them now.
yeah, not much. I don't
That's exactly
going to
how it went
class
for me
reunion.
too.
Yeah, going to class reunions is a love-hate affair for me. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess on to college, right? Um,
Yeah, so I mean, how did you know you were going to go into ministry? Did you know like right after high school?
um, that's a good question. In high school, I really wanted to be an architect, but I
Oh.
didn't have, I didn't have any math skills to speak of. And my mother was the driving force in our family. Whatever she wanted is what the family did. She made it very clear that I should go to Bible college, and that's what the Lord wants. And so I prayed about it, and I felt okay about it. And instead of going to a regular secular college and getting some sort of degree there that was useful for making a living, I went to a Bible college, Multnomah. It's now called Multnomah University, and so it was just a natural thing. I didn't resent it or anything. I thought, well, this is good because at least I'll go to a college where I fit in,
Yeah.
and uh, and basically I went there. I went to. They had a degree program where you would have to go to a liberal arts college to get your normal non-theological credits. So I went 2 years
Hmm.
there to the Bible college, and then I went to community college and got my liberal arts credits, and then went back for my final year at Multnomah and got a Bachelor of Theology. And and then I was like, this was at the beginning of the Jesus movement, the hippies that were
Oh,
becoming
yeah.
Christians, and I would go out on the streets witnessing. And I really, in Portland, they were a pretty big thing. They had a Christian street newspaper, and I really loved the fact that you could grow your hair long and not have to have free sex and all that. Um,
So
not have to
that was
buy into the
very evangelical, wasn't it?
very evangelical, yeah. And I didn't need the sex and drugs part of being a hippie, but I love the be there. But the trouble is, in the Christian world, in Christian ministry, whether you're going to be a pastor or missionary or youth work or whatever, you had to be pretty straight and narrow in your lifestyle, and your like the way you dressed, your hair was short above the ears, and the girls had to wear dresses down to their knees, and it was like, what am I going to do now with this degree in theology? I don't fit in because I had started letting my hair grow a little bit, and just a symbol of that, when you're graduating from college, and you put on your black graduation gown, and we had to walk up the hill to this big mega church for the graduation ceremony. And I was the only I thought, this is so boring, we all look the same. So I picked a rose. Portland is a rose city, so I picked a rose from a hedge we were walking past, and I pinned it to my gown, and it was the only bit of color in the whole graduation ceremony. And I think that was kind of symbolic of my personality, that I didn't want to be like everybody else.
Hmm.
So I was just wondering, what am I going to do now? And I was on the streets of Portland witnessing and doing all the stuff that good Christians are supposed to do. And I would go up to somebody with a tract, and I would say, "Have you heard the good news?" and and uh, and they would say, "Yeah, we've heard it about 100 times," and just turn around, walk away. And I said to myself, I gotta go somewhere where they need the good news, where they haven't heard of it before. And I thought, well, maybe Europe. I could go to Europe, because I didn't want to go to an Amazonian or Brazilian jungle, or
Yeah.
that was that life was too hard for me, and I didn't want to really have to learn another language. Although I did take 2 years of college German, and I did
Hmm.
find one organization at the time, a mission organization that didn't have a dress code. So I applied, and they 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 saw that I knew German a bit. I didn't really know it hardly at all. Um, and so I went to Europe with Operation Mobilization. Um,
I've
it's
heard of
a
that.
mainly known as a short-term missions thing for students and young people. Kind of the equivalent. YWAM has a Youth with a Mission,
Yeah.
is the kind of charismatic equivalent. Um, but I wasn't Pentecostal, or I hadn't at that time spoken tongues. So I thought, OM's for me. Let's do that. And so I went to Austria, um, went to Vienna. So it was nice. I mean,
Wow.
I was pretty civilized, pretty
Yeah.
pretty civilized way to be a missionary.
I know,
And
that sounds nice. That
yeah, it
wasn't
was.
that those are some of the places I went to.
Oh, really? Um, you're going to have to interview yourself sometime so I can watch your YouTube. You probably posted
I
your
know.
story, so I've got to watch that. I really haven't.
I have shared bits and pieces of it, but not really as much as the about the missions aspect of it. I mean,
Yeah,
that aspect is um it's kind of fun, and it makes sense looking back on it. It's kind of like, you know I mean, I'm sure that you can attest to this for yourself, but looking back on it, you probably did it because you had a heart to help people and wanted to go travel around and evangelize and do what he called
yeah,
us to do in the
yeah,
Great
exactly.
Commission.
What what group were you with, or what was it, a denomination?
I was an open Bible pastor, and open Bible's
Oh,
a really small denomination,
yeah.
similar
No,
to,
I
you
know
know,
about it. I might have even attended a service or
oh, really?
um, open Bible is, yeah. No, I don't know. Maybe that applies to other churches other than the denomination. But were they were they charismatic at all or Pentecostal?
Yeah, very Pentecostal.
Okay,
Very
yeah. No,
Pentecostal.
that's the one I know about them. Yeah.
Kind of very
Um,
similar to Assemblies of God, but just a
yeah.
lot smaller. And
Exactly. Yeah.
they derived out of four square churches, I think, back in the 60s or 70s, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So
Foursquare. I'm very familiar with Foursquare because I after I left the mission, we moved back to America. That was I went to a Foursquare church for several years and was in the worship band and helped out in a lot of
yeah,
ways.
yeah. And as time went on, that those churches or like vineyard churches, they were very acceptable of that dress code, of being more
Yeah.
relaxed. The holes in the jeans, the long hair, piercings. I mean, that was kind of like how the Pentecostal churches were around me, at least, where it was like the cool pastors
Yeah.
and the coffee, and
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
you do all that too?
Yeah. Although, I'm obviously a heck of a lot older than you are, but um, so churches were a lot more straight-laced back in the 70s and
Yeah,
80s. And then yes, things started loosening up, coffee and worship bands. And I played saxophone in high school and college, alto sax and baritone sax. And that reminds me, I was in a woodwind quartet at Bible college called the Royal Winds. And we would go to churches. We would put on shows. We would put on programs in churches and play hymns and gospel songs and witness in
that's cool.
between and encourage people to get to, I've got a picture. I'm wearing
Oh, you
this
do?
purple, I'm wearing this purple um, silk. It's like I don't know what you call it. It's not a shirt. It's you pull it over. And we all had matching uniforms, like the girls were all wearing the same material on their dresses. And that's the royal part. Purple is a royal color, so we.
Yeah,
But it was fun, I loved
yeah,
playing my saxophone in
that's
churches.
cool. So you guys
Um,
would travel and you
we
would do a performance and share
yeah, yeah, we
testimonies and
give
messages.
testimonies, yeah. And this was while I was in Bible college, so these were all churches in the greater Portland area that we went to. Um, that was the other thing about the Jesus movement is that it tended to be a little more charismatic or Pentecostal than the churches I was used to going to, and that was attractive to me. That's like, um, and eventually I went to a down the road. My home church was a charismatic Baptist church in England, um, and I did force myself to speak in tongues because I wanted to be as spiritual as I could. So
Yeah,
I did do that. You know how it goes.
I do
How
know
do you
how it
speak it?
goes.
Yeah, yeah, pastors, it's coaching people to be filled with the Spirit and speaking in tongues is an outworking of that. But it's not like it doesn't come natural. Well, maybe to some people it does, but there is. I was, as I think back, I'm so amused at how almost like you had to take lessons in how to speak in tongues if you
I
were.
think some people did give lessons.
Oh, gee,
So
yeah. So
odd. So you did try to speak in tongues. Did you get into the whole getting slain in the spirit and
oh, that was part of it. Yeah, being slain in the spirit, which is strange. Attending a Baptist church here in America, I don't know of any Baptist churches that are charismatic or Pentecostal,
Mhm.
but in England it was quite common. Um,
Hmm.
the, 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 the evangelical population in England is far smaller. That a proportion of the population is far smaller than it is here in America. Um, so usually in a medium-sized town of 30,000, you would only have two or three evangelical churches, and one of those would always be charismatic. I'm not Pentecostal because to me that's different than charismatic. The old school Pentecostal churches like Assembly of God. Um,
Yeah.
there were some of those too, but anyway, yeah. So I think get back to the story when I went to Austria, and which is a Catholic country, and of course the evangelicals, fundamentalists, Catholics aren't really Christians, right? So we would be going door to door. We'd have street meetings. And my German was, I soon learned 2 years of college German was pretty useless. Unless, so
You're
I went
kind
door to
of
door.
at that point. You're probably kind of screwed when screwed if you have to get to past tense or present or future tense. I think at that point you can pretty much only talk like present tense.
Yeah, exactly. Like I remember once we brought two German Austrian hippies back to our home base there in Vienna, and I couldn't speak enough German. They were interested. I couldn't speak enough German to really communicate well I really wanted to. So we we thought the American missionary and I thought, well, we've got a Billy Graham record here which is translated into German. Let's put that on and play it for him. So you can imagine how quickly bored they got with that. And after about 10 minutes, listening to that, they just made excuses and left. And so, it was pretty interesting being in a foreign culture for the first time in my life. It was really great. I mean, my secret desire was to be a skiing missionary. I wanted to go to Switzerland, but Austria was as close as I could get because I really loved skiing. So I thought, I'm sure there's missionaries who working in Switzerland who go skiing too. The skiing missionary, that's what I fancied myself, but I never got the chance.
That would be
Anyway,
fun.
um, yeah, before I left for Europe, I worked for a publisher in Portland, and Operation Mobilization had a large publishing arm, and they asked me to go to London to help out with their publishing division. They owned a chain of Christian bookstores in England as well. So I moved there, and the leader of Operation Mobilization, the guy who founded it, his name's George Brewer. I don't know if you've heard of him. Very dynamic guy, and one of the most purest living Christians. He lived simply with his family in a 1 or 2 bedroom flat in London. Didn't have a car. Lived very simply, and I lived in upstairs of his house for a while. But then I moved into a living space in a warehouse in South London, and one of the interesting experiences there was, do you remember a group called the Children of God? They were a hippie group, and now they're called something else. I think they're called the Family. Um,
Oh, that
but
sounds
they,
familiar, but I don't know details
oh,
about it.
you should look them up. Children of God. Moses Berg, I think, was the leader. They were freaky and weird. They got into such strange things. Flirty fishing is one thing they did. They would dress up their girls in short skirts and go onto the streets, and they would flirt with men in order to bring them back and preach to them. It was really bizarre. I mean,
That's
it's
so manipulative.
oh gosh, and they were really heavily Pentecostal. I mean, they that was my first time I'd really experienced that kind of Christianity. But these were as far out on the fringe as you could get in all their methods, and they still exist, but the leader's dead, of course, now. But You should look when you get time. You should look up Google Children of God movement.
Yeah, I'm going to.
It's just so bizarre. Anyway, I lived in their Europe. They were sharing the building with us in the book warehouse where we were, and so we would hear them in their worship meetings across the hallway, and um, so that I was really involved in a lot of church meetings, taking meetings, going around the country with teams. I played guitar as well, so we had a singing group. I got a little singing group together. Um, Another thing from my background is my mother formed my brother. I have one brother, and so my mother formed us into a gospel quartet, four-part harmony, and we would sing in church services,
That's
and
fun.
that's where, oh gosh, it was so much fun singing those four-part harmonies, and I got to love, just like I to this day, I really love music that has a lot of harmonization. Anyway, we would travel around and we would take meetings in England, which was far better for me because I knew the language. as 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 dissimilar as it might be to some versions of English in the British Isles, someplace you go, you barely understand what the locals are saying. Go to Scotland or the North Country, um, or Manchester. But anyway, that's what I did for several years. Was go to take meetings, work in the publishing division, um, and at the time too, I started teaching myself a little graphic design because I loved the drafting classes I had in high school, and so I thought this is really cool. We were publishing books, so
And useful.
yeah, I was so I started designing a book cover here and there. I taught myself graphic design by hanging around graphic designers there in London, and we would um, oh, here's a little interesting story. One thing that we did was we had some vans, and we would load the vans up with books. And one trip I took, we loaded a truck up with books, and then I did a circuit of the British Isles with these books, and we would stop at our Christian bookstores in the bigger cities and drop off a load of Christian books there. So went to Manchester, and then we got on the ferry and went to Northern Ireland to Belfast. And this was during the times when there was bombings going on and shootings. There was a lot of violence going on between the Catholics and the Protestants. And we were in this van, and I stopped at a bookstore in the Protestant part of Belfast, and the owner of the bookstore, the manager of the bookstore, I had another American with me, another missionary with me. He was helping me on the trip, and he took one look at my friend, and he said, "Hey son, you probably want to change your clothes before you go any further in this trip." Well, looked over, and he was wearing camouflage pants. Well, that's what the British military was wearing, was camouflage. And so it made sense when we were driving through neighborhoods. Some neighborhoods we would drive through, and there was the van had the open door, so he was standing in the doorway while we were driving around, and so people on the sidewalk could see him and the pants he was wearing. And in some neighborhoods we got people waving at us and saying, "Way to go!" Yeah, and other neighborhoods we had people giving us the finger. And looking back, it was because they thought, the locals thought we were military people driving in this van, in an unmarked van, and they saw him wearing camouflage. Everybody thought he was a British Army member, and so looking back on it, it was a really dangerous thing we did.
Yeah.
Um, so he changed his pants or trousers, and we continued on. Didn't have any more problems after that. But that was a very interesting experience we had there. Um,
So did you go on to pastor at our church, or did you mostly do missionary evangelism, that kind of stuff?
yeah, well, the kind of way that the way I finished out my Christian professional ministry was this way. If you know about YWAM, you've heard about of YWAM, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they had a gospel ship, Anastasis. Well, most people know about that, but they don't know that OM also had two gospel ships. And I thought it'd be really interesting. By that time, I had met a British girl, a nurse, in one of the meetings I had held in a Nurses Christian Fellowship meeting. We took a team there, and I preached there, and I was talking to this cute British nurse at the book table. We always had a book table, of course, and she had this. I was cracking this sort of uh, dry wit I have. These jokes, and she understood my sense of humor completely, you know, and so we fell in love, and a couple of years later we got married, and I had two sons that were born in Britain. Anyway, she joined the mission
Oh.
too, um, and the ship OM had got this 7,000 ton ship, and they were converting it, and they needed staff. They needed people to staff the ship because they were going to go around the world, just like the Anastasis does for YWAM. Spend a month in port, and the leaders of the mission came to us and said, "Hey Wes, I wonder if you and Jane would consider joining the ship as staff members. Jane could be the ship's nurse, and you could be our programming. You could work in our programming office, which we planned meetings on shore and took meetings and preached and everything." So we got on the ship, and we joined the ship in Southampton in England, and then sailed down to the Azores. Did some meetings there. Then we sailed to Barbados, which was a really hard post to endure, you know.
I was gonna
Um,
say,
yeah,
wow.
evangelizing on the white sandy beaches and snorkeling there, and yeah, it was hard. I think the ship went into dry dock for a few days, and so we had to kill some time. So we had a lot of free time, and it was pretty sweet.
Oh wow, that's
um,
nice.
and then we went to Venezuela, Colombia,
I've been to Trinidad and
Argentina.
Tobago on missions, and
Oh,
so you
really?
can see Venezuela from the very southern coast of Trinidad.
Yeah, Trinidad and Tobago
It's only like
that would
seven and
be
a half miles from the coast of
wow. I
Venezuela.
didn't know. I didn't realize it was that close.
Mm-hmm.
Um, wow. We spent a month in Barranquilla and Maracaibo, and so you're familiar with that part of the country. I bet part of the continent anyway. Yeah. Were you preaching there? What were
I
you
never
doing?
went into South America.
No, but what did you do in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I back then it was when I was actually, I don't know if you've ever heard of Master's Commission or not.
Rings a
It's
bell, but
kind of similar to like what YWAM is. It's for college age students, and it's traveling, doing missions, and we would put on church services. We would do these things called human videos where we would act out skits to music, and
uh,
and then we would give a message, testimonies at church services, and then at the end of the year we would do a big missions trip. And so that year we did a missions trip to Trinidad, and we did some street ministry, and uh went into orphanages and things like that.
yeah, that's very similar to what we did on the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Everything you mentioned is what we did as well. We'd get into a port, we'd set up. Sometimes we would rent a hall. If there was no hall available, we'd set up a big circus tent type thing,
Oh wow,
And
that's cool.
we'd have cultural nights because on the ship that I was on, the Doulos, there were people from there were people from 35 or 40 different countries as staff members. So our trope or our meme was look at how with the love of Jesus all these people can live together and love each other and get along and from all these different cultures and everybody
So
we
silly
would
because you can still do that without Jesus.
yeah, exactly. People would put on their dress from their native home countries,
That
their
is cool though. That part's cool.
and and then we'd have this international night and we would sing about Jesus and sometimes a group of people from France would sing in French and different different countries or areas of the world they'd put on their little thing and show some of their cultural um, things, but it was all with a view to having people accept Jesus as their Savior.
Yeah.
Um, and our ships did go into Muslim countries as well, where we weren't allowed to be so obvious
Yeah, you
or
can't really
open
say
about it.
that you're there doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and part
Praying,
of
no praying out
the
loud.
exactly, yeah. So we had, I don't know how YWAM would handle this on their ship. I think they do a lot of medical work as well, and our ships did some medical work and some relief work, food and
Hmm.
stuff. But the main thing we had was it was called educational book exhibits. In fact, that was the name of the uh, umbrella company, um, and we would have permanent book exhibits set up on the ship, and people would come and they'd queue up for hours and stand in these long lines, half a mile long, to come on the ship and to buy educational books. Of course, we had religious books, Christian books as well, but that was the kind of that was kind of the foot in the door for some of these countries that weren't quite they didn't like missionary work much. But that was
Hmm.
one way the ships could get into these countries that were not so friendly to missionary work was the educational books. And it really did work. A funny thing with the Clergy Project, there's a guy I met there who was also on one of the ships. And I mentioned something
Oh,
about
interesting.
getting Bibles into countries, and he said once he was wandering around the ship and he found this secret room. He found this room that wasn't marked, and he opened it. It was full of Bibles in Arabic script, and so I guess there was some surreptitious Bible smuggling going on, but I never knew about it until last week when he shared a comment on the Facebook TCP page that he had actually found out and asked somebody, and the guy said, "Well, yeah, it's not, keep it to yourself. It's not known. It's not meant to be known, but we do some of that." So that was a very interesting
And very
aspect of
dangerous too.
yeah, it was an aspect of the ship ministry. Uh, 30 years later, I actually find out about it. I never knew about it when I was on the ship. But
Wow. So you were
yeah,
doing that traveling and you didn't know that they had secret rooms with
no,
Bibles being
I
smuggled?
didn't. No.
Wow.
Yeah, so and I remember about, about this where this sort of thing we spread in our meetings that look how the Christians love each other on this small ship. Well, I nearly got punched in the face by the chief engineer once. In the it's not a hallway on a ship. It's not a hallway. What is it called? I can't remember. Anyway, um,
I don't know.
passageway. Uh, I was in the program department. It was my job to plan programs, take meetings, organize teams to take meetings, and go out into the city and different churches and whatever. But I also had these design skills that weren't, they were on hold. They were being they were sort of sitting dormant on the ship, but the print shop on the ship was having problems, and so and so the chief engineer he ordered me to go and help out in the print shop. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I'm a program manager, and you'll have to. My boss would have to order me to do that. You can't do that. And he grabbed me by the throat, and his fist went back. He was so mad. And then the second highest person, level of authority on the ship, was walking down the aisle at that time, and he just walked past and didn't say anything. He just kind of laughed to himself and walked past and didn't even stop. But the guy didn't hit me, but it was just there was a lot of tension and stress on it. You know, all the difference in personalities, in cultures, Americans especially. I mean, Americans can be really obnoxious, thinking that their culture and their country is the greatest in the world, and it's not. You know, but sometimes some of these young kids, Americans, young Christian Americans, out of the country for the first time, and they weren't sensitive to cultural issues, and they didn't understand how obnoxious we could be sometimes, and not just Americans, you know, but you have to be on a small 100. I can't remember. I think it was either 150 or 300 of us on the ship, living in close proximity, and you know, things
Quite
are
a few
about
people.
it's like a pressure cooker, but
Yeah.
we did manage. You know, in some ways, it was true that I think our Christian love allowed us to keep our, you know, anger sometimes under control. But it wasn't perfect. It sure wasn't heaven on earth, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I mean, and how like you said you were traveling on a ship to go to all these places? You guys went on a ship?
Yeah, I mean, the ship would sail from port to port in third world countries. And I lost, on one of the journeys from the Azores to Barbados, I think I lost about 15 pounds because I was so seasick the whole time. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah, but anyway, we were on our way to Rio de Janeiro, I believe, and we got a telegram that my father-in-law had passed away. And so as soon as the ship got into port, we hopped on a plane, went back to England, and helped my mother-in-law through all this. And actually, at that point, we were finished with missionary work, and I decided I had enough skill to make a living as a graphic designer. So we left the mission, even though I just had a Bachelor of Theology and nothing else, no other
Hmm.
qualifications for anything. But I was good enough that that's what I spent the rest of my life doing, was graphic design.
Oh,
Um,
wow. So
but
did
I
you
was
still
still heavily.
believe?
Oh yeah, yeah, really,
At,
really.
at what point did you lose your faith? I mean, you left the ministry or left
Yeah,
missions, and then
yeah,
you went back and worked a job in
yeah,
design, and then what
yeah.
point did you lose your faith?
Yeah, I almost lost track of point of the interview was deconversion part. Um, yeah, and I was heavily involved in churches for the next 20 or so years. I was a deacon and elder and youth group leader and all. I did all those things and
Yeah.
got back. We moved back to America in 1990, and about 12 years ago, I always had problems. I always had problems with the concept of hell. I think even when I was a missionary saying you have to accept Jesus as your savior, I still, I think deep down inside, I really, how could a loving God punish somebody for eternity? But I sort of squashed those feelings and sort of just sublimated them because I wanted to be a good Christian. But it got to the point, it really got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. I mean, this is what the New Testament's all about, is accepting Jesus and avoiding being tortured for eternity in hell. So that was the first thing to go, and we were going to a Mennonite church, a really cool, small little Mennonite church, and the pastor was so cool, and he, I just love the Mennonites. And we were really involved there, but I was having my real serious doubts, and I said I can't believe in hell anymore, and I was really scared of where this was going because I said I don't think I can even call myself a Christian anymore.
So hell was the first thing that you dismissed?
Hell was the first thing.
Me too.
But yeah, but that opened the door, right, to other
Yeah.
things. And
yeah, exactly. I was like, oh my gosh, what else is bullshit? And it was like an open door to all of that.
Yeah.
An open door.
Opened, yeah. But I don't know about you, but the thing I was scared about was my wife, and if she found out I didn't believe anymore. Well, we were having a talk one night about prayer, and I said something like, I don't think prayer works. I can't think of any big answers to prayer. And she turned to me and said, you too? And we started talking, and it was about a year. See, I stopped believing for about a year, and about a year later, we finally broached the subject, and it turns out she had stopped believing for about a year as well. So we were we both had stopped believing. We were going to church still, but we wanted to be a good Christian family. But I think my two sons had stopped believing even before we stopped believing. But I tried. I don't know about you, but I wasn't. I wanted something. There was a tremendous sense of community that I'd lost because I just I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sing the hymns.
Yeah.
I couldn't join into praying. I couldn't preach.
Yeah.
Couldn't do anything.
The worship was so uncomfortable.
Yeah, worship was very uncomfortable because I didn't believe it. And I did 2 or 3 Sundays. I went to the big Unitarian church here in Portland. And it was okay, but then I thought, yeah, there's nothing here that I can object to. Absolutely nothing that I can say, well, these people are pretty loosey-goosey with their spirituality. And
yeah, they have no creed in the Unitarian churches.
Exactly. But then after just a month of attending there, I thought, I don't even need worship. I don't even need to go to a worship service on Sunday as loose and non-theological, non-doctrinaire as they are. I said, I don't even need to be with a group of people singing songs, even if they're not, they're so neutral in the lyrics. But so I stopped doing that, and then I really, and at the time I thought I could, you've heard of Sojourners, right?
No.
Oh well, it was the forerunner of what do they call it? The very liberal evangelicals. There's a name for it these days. I came across it, but I can't even remember what it was. But say 12 years ago, the Sojourners was the group that was like heavily involved in social justice. They were evangelicals, but to them, social justice was way more important than this accepting Jesus as your Savior, and they. So I thought I could go with them, but no, it was when I started looking at Christian theology, the second domino to fall after hell was needing a Savior to wash away your sins because you're a sinner and you have a sin nature and you were born in sin. And the more I thought about that, the more that it was just as ridiculous, because most human beings, the vast majority of human beings, are decent people. They're not sinners. Not in the same way that you call someone a plumber. He does plumbing for a living, right? It's not, if you replace a washer in your faucet, you're not a plumber, And yet in Christianity, every human being is a sinner. Like they spend all day trying to think up ways to sin, or either deliberately or subconsciously, you're a sinner because everything you do, you want, you know. And I said, no, everybody I know, every single person I know is trying to do the best they can every day.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't deliberately hurt people. They don't deliberately do wrong things. They just try and do the best they can. So I no, I don't believe that humans were born in sin. And if they're not born in sin, why do we need somebody to wash away sin, you know? And
Yeah.
the blood sacrifice, to the whole Old Testament sacrificing of animals
Yeah.
to wash away sins, and Jesus being the New Testament type, or representation of sacrificing, shedding blood to wash away sins. That's so it's so primitive, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I can't believe that I believed in all that stuff for 46 years. Um, but once I started looking at it, I just like, how could I have believed that stuff? And I go like you, probably when you stop believing, one of the hard, and people say, Christians say to me, you must be mad at the church, or somebody must have hurt you in the church or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly anybody I know in any of the, like, especially TCP, but people who've deconverted here, who used to be born again believers here in the secular community in Portland, none of them none of them were mad at church, or had any bad experiences. It was all just a rational unraveling of a worldview. And the thing that
It's
we
usually
all
sad to
miss.
leave. It's hard to leave.
Oh yeah,
It's hard to know that, oh, I believed in this wholeheartedly, but the theology just doesn't hold up. And there's nothing you
yeah.
can do about that. You
The,
can't
to,
unsee that.
Down to the last person I know, that was, and probably yourself included, that was the hardest thing to leave, was community.
Yeah.
Uh, just to have a group of people there that were all different personalities, but we had this thing in common, and we
Mm-hmm.
cared for each other. We cared for each other when somebody was going through problems. We would gather around, we would help, with physical help,
Even
or
just lay
material goods.
hands and pray on them. It felt comforting. It felt like you were
Yeah,
doing something.
yeah, yeah,
And even like, maybe otherwise you would feel uncomfortable to embrace that person in some way, but
yeah,
being able to lay hands on somebody and pray for them and be there with them felt like you then could do that easily.
yeah,
At least that's what it was for me.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, me too. Yeah, and well, and one other important aspect, that if I hadn't converted, then for any other reason, evangelical Christianity in America today is a political movement. It's a right wing political movement, and
Yeah, it is.
they hardly pretend to be followers of Jesus anymore. And I don't understand how anybody could be, if they if they really love God and were true followers of Jesus. I don't know how they could be an American evangelical. It's not like that in Europe. Uh, I don't know why American Christianity is so rabidly right wing, but it is. And um, even if I hadn't had theological reasons to believe, I couldn't have stayed in the church, because what is it? 80% of evangelicals now are, you know, they're they're basically on the right wing of politics, and I just
Yep.
couldn't. When I left when I left America to be a missionary, American evangelical Christianity was non-political, zero politics. Uh, not maybe not 0%, but you didn't talk about politics in church. You didn't talk about candidates and who you supported
Yeah.
and who you didn't support, because that wasn't allowed. That wasn't allowed in American churches, and even legally. the tax code didn't allow it, but now that doesn't make any difference, I guess.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
what
so
was
that was
it
12
like?
years ago when I deconverted, and it
12?
didn't take 12 years ago, and it didn't really take the transition to being an atheist, and I don't care what you call me, atheist, agnostic, um, non non-theist, whatever. Um, it didn't take all that long to be comfortable in that new skin. I know a lot of people do take it takes 2 or 3 years, but for me it was probably a year or so, and I was all out. My wife, though,
Hmm.
we're separated now, but we're still best friends. She said her hardest thing was still being scared of going to hell if it was true. She
That's what I've heard from so many people.
like, what
That's
if
just
what
so
if I'm
sad.
wrong? What if I'm
Hmm.
wrong? Um, and I'd always told her, I said, what if you are wrong? If God is God of love, you're not going to go to hell because you care. You know, um, a God a God who loves humanity will not punish them for eternity for a wrong belief. And so I don't think you need to be scared. But anyway, she got over it eventually, and
Good, good.
yeah. But it does scare people to the first let go of faith. It's a big step to make,
Yeah,
and
I hear people have nightmares. I mean, I didn't deal with that as much since it was the first thing I dismissed. And, when I looked into it, realizing that the Bible didn't really even support a literal, actual hell, place of torment in the afterlife. And so for me, it wasn't that hard to dismiss, but I've heard that there are lots of people that are very frightened at night or have nightmares for years at the thought of hell and being wrong.
yeah. And one thing, to me, this is really crucial. When I deconverted, I had never met any other evangelical who deconverted and what didn't believe in God anymore. I thought I was on my own. Um, I I didn't know where to turn. I thought, oh man, I'm the only deconverted evangelical in Portland, I thought. And then I started. There were some books that really helped me too. There's a book that was the first book I read. A Wycliffe Bible translator called Daniel Everett lived with the Baraha tribe in the Amazon, and he wrote a book called "Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes." And he became an atheist because the tribe he was trying to teach the Word of God to learn their language and share Scripture with them and tell them about Jesus. He said they were so content and so peaceful and so loving that I didn't feel like that I had nothing to offer. Nothing. They didn't need Jesus, and living with the tribe caused him to deconvert. Now that book really helped me, and I still love it to this day, because it's not a book about deconversion. It's a book about working with a tribe and their worldview and what they believed about the afterlife, or whether there was a God or not. It's a story. It's a story about his time as a linguist, living with the tribe, and he did lose his family. His family, his wife and kids did get divorced, and that does happen a lot, I know, which breaks my heart. But then I gradually somehow met somebody and met the groups in secular groups in Portland, like CFI, Center for Inquiry. There's a Humanists of Greater Portland. There was a couple other groups that were very active at the time. These days, it's pretty quiet on that scene in Portland, but those were the groups that once I found those people, I found lots of people who grew up as evangelicals who didn't believe in God anymore. And that was, if I had any suggestions to make for somebody who's seriously questioning their faith, is find somebody. And I know it's going to be hard. Portland is an easy town to find people non-religious people. And I know it's hard in a lot of cities in America, especially in the South and the Midwest, to find people like this. But wherever you go, even in those areas of the country, there are groups of former believers who meet together and just have a good time socially and just share with each other. So that would be one of my really. There's a lot of good books written by people too, and these days there's the internet and
Hmm.
and
There's a lot
TCP
of
group.
online communities, yeah. And
Yes.
if you were in leadership, a pastor of some kind, yeah, TCP. Well, aside from that,
Yeah.
believers or ex-believers, they have, like recovering from religion, secular therapy project,
Yeah. Freedom from Religion is another group too.
freedom from religion, yeah,
Dan Barker.
things like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I didn't even know that some of this stuff was out there when I left the church. And now I think it's really good information for people to know that there are a lot of communities out there, and
Yeah.
like a lot of podcasts and YouTube shows to watch, a lot of really great books.
Yeah. When I deconverted 12 years ago, there none of that. I mean, the internet wasn't very big either, but these days you got all kinds of resources to turn to if you need support.
Yeah, I know there's
Yeah.
a lot now. You said you left 12 years ago. How long ago did you join the Clergy Project?
Well, the interesting thing is, in Portland, about the year after I deconverted, Freedom from Religion had their national conference here in Portland, and so Dan Barker and Annie Gaylor Smith, is that her name? Uh, and
Oh my goodness.
they came to Portland and had their conference, and they were forming the Clergy Project at the time. And who's that Pentecostal pastor that he's written a book, and he was there at the conference here in Portland too. And anyway, some of those people met me. We met for a little um, meal, and they invited me to become a member of the Clergy Project just when it was starting. So I've been a member pretty much. Oh man, I'm trying to remember this guy's name. He sat there, and he's one of the founding members, and he asked if I would
Daniel
join.
Dennett.
No, he's
I know there
Daniel
was
Dennett is.
Richard.
I've talked to Daniel Dennett. He's been in Portland too, at a couple different times. He's he's a younger guy, and he's got black hair and glasses. Um,
Drew.
if I looked up, huh?
Drew.
Pardon?
Drew. Drew.
Drew?
I don't know how to say his last name, but it starts with a B. Breckius. However you say it. He's younger.
Yeah, that's it's starting to ring a bell, and my internet's starting to break up a little bit. Um, so you were chopping up there,
Oh,
but
sorry. Yeah, Drew.
I'd have to.
I was wondering if you were talking about
Yeah,
Drew.
yeah, he was here. He was here. It might have been him. I'm trying to remember. He, uh, oh, he wrote a song. He wrote a song and sang it. It was pretty. It was pretty. It went kind of viral on the secular internet. Um, but I can't remember now. My
So that's
brain
awesome.
cells
You
are.
started like that first year back in 2011.
Yeah, yeah. It was then, and I don't know if I joined right away. Maybe I waited a few months, but then I joined and have made contact with lots of nice, great people, you know.
That's
And
awesome.
what you're doing is was wonderful, and it's really helpful. And one of my goals in the next month or so is to start is to watch these videos, interviews you've done with people, and
Yeah,
just
I think
heard
that
your
it would
story.
be just really helpful for other people out there that are involved in ministry
Yeah,
to hear these stories and hear why people that were in ministry that lost their faith. And there's a lot of logical reasons. I mean, it probably is good for people to hear that it's not always just because somebody's hurt,
yeah,
and
I,
there
yeah,
is some of that too, but there's a lot of reasons, and usually it's because the theology didn't add up.
yeah. One of the things my life kind of when I deconverted, my life kind of opened up a bit. I was free to do things that I really firmly believed in. One of the things that gave me the most meaning of almost anything I've ever done was to be a pro-choice patient escort uh, at a women's clinic here in Portland. And it's really funny. I had an encounter. We were protecting the patients coming into the clinic from the fundamentalists, the Christians who there was a pastor who would bring a bunch of people every Saturday morning and preach at the patients going in through loudspeakers and stuff. And we had police called, occasionally come out to to speak with those people. Well, I was talking to on the porch. I was talking to my fellow patient escort, and I mentioned the fact that I had gone to Bible college, got a degree from Multnomah. Well, one of the Christian protesters there heard me say that, and he ran back to his pastor and said, "Pastor, that guy there, that guy, he went to Multnomah too." So it turns out the pastor actually went to Multnomah Bible College, and he was there on the other side of the, he was holding up his sign saying, um, "Abortion is murder," and "Don't murder your babies," and all these horrible signs, and shouting at the patients. And here I was, you know, on the other side trying to protect the patients, and that was it was I did that for several years. Every Saturday morning I would go there, and it was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. I had some, you know, great conversations with people, but that was a
Really
funny thing
awesome.
to meet another Multnomah graduate, but he was on the other side. He was on the dark side.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, that's really cool that you did that for so long
Yeah, the clinic.
for women's rights.
Oh, man, that's one of my passions is women's rights. So when I deconverted, I was allowed to do all that stuff, and have another. I call it I call it born again again.
That's funny.
So yeah, no, it's just like it's just so much. Life is so much broader now for me than it ever was. I never drank alcohol till I deconverted really. Um,
Same here. I was
and
27.
And now I have a little mixed drink. I have one mixed drink every night, every evening, just to end the day and to just calm down and everything. And it's not evil. It's not.
No, that's not evil at all. There's
Yeah.
nothing evil about that. For me, it
No.
was like I wasn't really that interested in it before, and I didn't do it while I was a Christian. I tried it a little bit after I left my
Yeah.
life as a pastor, and then I still didn't really like it. And so I haven't had any for a few years
There was
myself.
a recovering from religion has a local West Coast group, and I haven't been to their meetings, but I've tried to get on their meetings. But a couple weeks ago, you'll laugh at this. They had a guest speaker on the Zoom meeting who was a former pastor's wife, uh, and I believe she might even been a former pastor. She had all the credentials, and she deconverted. And her talk, she became a nudist, and her talk was on
My
on.
mom's a nudist.
Oh, really? It was about nudism
I
after
might need to
after.
edit that out. She might get mad at me for that.
Well, that's funny because I've said Portland has this famous the world naked bike ride every summer. I don't it probably it wasn't held last summer, but in the local secular community, I've tried to say, look, I'd be happy to take part in the bike ride. Anybody want to go with me? I don't want to go by myself. And everybody's like, no, you're on your own there, buddy. Everybody's too even in the secular community, I can't find anybody who wants to do that. But
It
it's
just
funny,
feels
isn't
like
it?
it would be uncomfortable. I wouldn't care, but
Oh yeah, you got to be comfortable with your body. And one thing that
well,
you
I
and
mean, like just kind of uncomfortable, like sitting on the bike naked.
oh, you get a pillow. Um,
Yeah.
but know that, and that's the other thing that is so liberating about leaving Christianity, evangelical Christianity behind is the body shame. Um, I have a YouTube. I did a Moth Story Hour where um, I told a story in the local version of the Moth Story Hour that I've got on video where I was coming back from class one day, and a classmate of mine in the men's dorm, there was an ambulance there, and I said, what's going on? What's wrong? They said, oh, Bill cut his penis off, and I said, what? Yeah, he cut his penis off because you know. And I was there. I saw the ambulance take him away. We never saw him again. The administration never talked about it. But Jesus said in Matthew 5, if any part of your body offends you, cut it off. If your hand
Oh my
offends you,
God.
cut it off. Well, he went one step further and cut his penis off. And that's just symbolic of how distorted um, the evangelical view of, or the New Testament view of sexuality, uh, and body shaming and all that kind of stuff. I guarantee you that 90% of the male students in that Bible college were masturbating, but and the rest of us were ashamed about it and we didn't talk about it. But he's the one that actually took that step.
Oh,
It's
that's
a
so
horrible
sad. And
story.
he
It is.
probably wasn't even doing anything wrong. If he was
No,
just
it was
watching porn or something, like
exactly.
there's nothing
Yeah,
wrong with that.
it's a horrible story. I just felt so bad for him.
Oh, that poor guy.
Yeah, but I left all that behind, all that body shame and
Well, that's awesome that were able to completely turn around and have a
yeah,
180 in your thought process.
yeah. So yeah, it's a whole new life out there after you leave that worldview behind. It's so exciting to me. I
Yeah,
know some people do have problems because they were a lifetime in ministry as a pastor. They're not trained. They don't have a they don't have something they could do to make a living except flip burgers or something. And I
yeah,
feel
I know. I mean, all
I
I
feel
had
for
was
them.
my bachelor's in Bible and theology,
Yeah,
and experience in the church.
yeah. And that my my heart goes out to those people because they got a harder road to hoe than I did. But anyway,
Yeah.
so
So
yeah.
I actually have another interview scheduled directly after this one, and I think he's
Okay.
probably waiting. So let's just I you did give a little bit of advice there at one point, but let's wrap it up with maybe if there's any last things that you'd like to say to anybody who might be listening who's maybe still stuck in the church or still stuck in ministry.
Well, I again, my path out of Christianity and ministry was a lot easier than some people who are maybe my age or a bit younger, of course. If you're 10 or 20 years younger, it's a lot harder. I realize that some people are going to probably stay in ministry until they qualify to retire, even though they're non-believers, and it's got to be really hard. I really don't know if I have anything that will help people, except that on the other side, if you happen to make that journey out of faith, it's my life has just blossomed, and I would encourage people to be in, follow their doubts, examine their doubts. Some people may decide that they'll stay as believers, and that's fine too. I hardly ever witness do the anti-witness, which is trying to convince Christians who are happy with their faith to leave their faith. I never do that. But I will talk to people and encourage them to fully investigate their doubts, and that if they do leave, they're gonna look back and say, why didn't I do that earlier? But I just say keep going, and keep asking questions, because that'll lead you where you need to go.
Yeah, definitely. There's nothing wrong with asking questions, because if what you're trying to find out is right, you'll circle back to it, because there'll be
Yeah.
the information out there to back that up.
And people will find a community. There will be somebody, you will find a community you can join, whether it's online or in real life in your town.
Yeah.
You will find people. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Wesley, it was really nice meeting you and talking to you for the first time. It was a lot of fun. I
Yeah.
liked getting to know
Thank you
you
for
and hearing some of it.
yeah. Thank you for having me. It's always good to go back and remember things that you thought you'd forgotten years ago, but
Yeah.
talk to you. Yeah. So yeah, I'm happy to talk to you, and the best to you. And I'm going to be watching your interviews for sure.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
Okay.
Thank you for coming on here.
Yeah. Thank you
Uh,
again for the interview.
yeah. Well, I
Have a
hope
good
you have a
day.
good rest of the day. Yeah, you too.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.